Saruman the White, wisest of the wizards, leader of the White Council, chosen by the Valar to stand against Sauron. And yet, by the War of the Ring, he was no longer a guide or protector. He'd become a traitor, a tyrant, and an imitator of the Dark Lord himself. His betrayal shocked Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel, but Tolkien's writing shows us that Sauron's fall was not sudden. It was slow, subtle, and deeply human. Today, we'll uncover Saruman's story, his true nature as a Maia, his role in Middle-earth, the envy that poisoned him, his obsession with machinery, and the final petty malice that consumed him. This is the story of pride turned to ruin. This is the story of Saruman's corruption. First, let's begin with looking at Saruman the Maia. To understand Saruman, we must begin far earlier, before Middle-earth, before the Third Age, even before the First Age. Saruman was originally a Maia, one of the lesser Ainur. The Ainur were spirits created by Eru-Ilúvatar, the One, before the world began. The greatest of the Ainur became the Valar, and among their many servants were the Maia. Saruman's Maia name is Curinir or Curumo, and we know his nature. He served the Valar Aulë the smith, the master of crafts, stone, and knowledge. This explains Saruman's love for machines, his obsession with craft, and his desire to bend matter and knowledge to his will. Tolkien writes in Unfinished Tales that when the Astari were chosen to go to Middle-earth, Saruman was the first to volunteer. He appeared in the form of an old man, wise and commanding, with robes of white to symbolize purity and leadership. His elvish name, Curinir, means man of skill. To the hobbits, he was later known as Sharki, a corruption of the Orcish word for old man. At the start, Saruman was trusted. He was placed at the head of the Astari and later led the White Council. But already, Tolkien hints at his weakness, his pride in his knowledge, his certainty in his superiority, a flaw that Sauron would one day exploit. Now let's look at pride and rivalry. Saruman's early corruption is bound to his rivalry with Gandalf. When Círdan the Shipwright gave Gandalf Narya, the elven ring of fire, Saruman was outraged. In the Unfinished Tales, Tolkien writes that this breeding of jealousy marked the beginning of his decline. As the leader of the White Council, Saruman initially worked with Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf, but Galadriel did not trust him. She once suggested that Gandalf, not Saruman, should be the head of the council, and Saruman never forgot this insult. By the time of the Council of Elrond, centuries later, Saruman had grown openly hostile to Gandalf. He mocked his concerns, belittled his warnings, and secretly began to plot against him. This pride and envy echo a theme Tolkien often returned to: the fall of the mighty through arrogance. Just as Morgoth, the greatest of the Valar, was undone by pride, and Fëanor, the greatest of the elves, by envy, so too would Saruman fall through rivalry and resentment. In Saruman, we see the same tragic pattern: greatness poisoned by envy, wisdom corrupted by pride. Now let's look at knowledge into obsession. Saruman's vast knowledge should have been his strength. Instead, it became his downfall. As the ages passed, Saruman immersed himself in the study of the rings of power. He alone of the Astari became an expert in their making, their nature, and their corruption. But in learning Sauron's secrets, he grew fascinated. Tolkien makes clear that Saruman became convinced he could master Sauron's methods for himself. He did not seek merely to resist Sauron, he sought to rival him. His obsession drove him to Orthanc, the Black Tower of Isengard. There, he studied, schemed, and eventually came into the possession of a palantír. one of the ancient seeing stones. The palantír proved to be his undoing. Through it, Sauron ensnared him. At first, Saruman thought he could manipulate Sauron, but the Dark Lord twisted his mind with half-truths, showing him visions of power, despair, and domination. From this point forward, Saruman was trapped, not fully Sauron's slave, but no longer free. He convinced himself he was acting independently, yet every choice he made drew him closer to Mordor's shadow. Now let's look at Isengard's transformation. The most visible sign of Saruman's corruption was the transformation of Isengard. Once a green valley, guarded by the Tower of Orthanc, it became under Saruman a fortress of fire and iron. Trees were felled in vast numbers. Great pits were dug. The river Isen was diverted to power furnaces and forges. Saruman bred a new race of orcs, the Uruk-hai. Stronger, taller, able to endure sunlight, they were the perfect soldiers of industry. He combined orcish savagery with the resilience of men and produced a race bred only for war. Tolkien describes Saruman's Isengard as a place where wheels and engines turned endlessly. This was no accident. Tolkien, who despised the industrialization of his beloved English countryside, poured his own fears into Isengard. The smoke, the destruction of nature, the mindless machines, all are reflections of what Tolkien saw happening in his own lifetime. Saruman became the very embodiment of what Tolkien most feared, the worship of machinery and power at the expense of creation and life. Now let's look at the voice of Saruman. Saruman's most subtle weapon was his voice. Tolkien describes in The Two Towers, those who listened unwarily to that voice could scarcely keep from believing the words it spoke. All that it said seemed wise and reasonable, and its most croaked counsels seemed only the most shrewd and sensible. This gift of persuasion nearly undid his enemies, even after his armies were destroyed. When the victorious Rohirrim and Ents confronted him, his voice almost swayed them. Only Gandalf's wisdom and authority prevented them from falling into his trap. The voice of Saruman represents propaganda, the ability for leaders to cloak selfish ambition into a language of reason, peace, and progress. He claimed to seek order. He claimed to seek knowledge. He claimed to desire peace. But in truth, he desired mastery. His voice was not the voice of wisdom, but the seduction of tyranny dressed in honeyed words. Now let's look at Saruman and Gandalf and the Great Divide. Perhaps nowhere in Tolkien's moral vision clearer than the contrast between Gandalf and Saruman. Both were Maia, both were sent by the Valar, both were entrusted with guiding Middle-earth, but Gandalf chose humility, while Saruman chose domination. Gandalf refused the One Ring when offered it by Frodo, fearing its corruption. Saruman lusted for it, convinced he could wield it for good, though, truly, he desired it for himself. Gandalf walked among hobbits and common folk, earning trust through kindness. Saruman sat in his tower, looking down on others with disdain. Where Gandalf inspired, Saruman controlled. Where Gandalf loved the world, Saruman sought to reshape it. In their divergence, Tolkien illustrates his deepest theme, that true power lies not in domination, but in humility and service. Gandalf became the White, not because he sought it, but because he refused it. Saruman fell because he demanded it. Now let's look at the Scouring of the Shire. Many readers forget that Saruman's story does not end at Isengard. After Gandalf breaks his staff and leaves him powerless, Saruman slinks north. Bitter and broken, he makes his way to the Shire. There, he commits his final cruelty. Taking the name Sharky, he enslaves the hobbits, cuts down the trees, and fills the land with smoke and ugliness. He turns the Shire, Tolkien's symbol of innocence and peace, into a miniature Isengard. This chapter, The Scouring of the Shire, is Tolkien's most personal allegory. After his childhood countryside of Sarehole was scarred by factories, in letter he said, "The scouring of the Shire is, in reality, my own bitterness at the destruction of England by the machine." Saruman's petty tyranny in the Shire shows how far he had fallen. Once a Maia of Aulë, once the White Wizard, now reduced to a bitter old man lashing out at hobbits. In the end, Wormtongue slays him, cutting his throat on the very doorstep of Bag End. His spirit rises in malice, but a wind of the west blows it away. No redemption, no glory, only nothingness. The once great Saruman ends in humiliation, the smallest of tyrants. Saruman's corruption is one of Tolkien's most powerful warnings. Here was a Maia, a spirit of the same order as Sauron, entrusted with wisdom and leadership. Yet, through pride, envy, and obsession, he became the very shadow he was sent to resist. He fell not through sudden betrayal, but through 1,000 small choices. Pride over humility, envy over trust, and mastery over service. Saruman reflects Tolkien's fears of the modern world, the destruction of nature, the worship of machinery, and the seduction of power cloaked in promise and peace. He is a reminder that wisdom without humility becomes arrogance, that knowledge without love becomes obsession, that even the greatest light can fall into the deepest shadow. Saruman the White became Saruman of many colours, fragmented, broken, consumed by his own lies. And so, he stands as a warning to us all that the greatest danger is not always the Dark Lord in the distance, but the corrupting voice of the one who once walked beside us. That brings us to the end of today's video. I do apologise if you can hear the croak in my throat. I'm a little bit sick at the moment, but I wanted to get back into making these videos after focusing a lot on my battle board for my other channel. So want to see where I've been for the last couple of weeks? Have a look over there. If you're here because you like my Warhammer content, then I also recommend you look at my other channel, because that's what we do over there. We build, paint, and we'll soon be battling our Warhammer armies against each other. So if that is more your cup of tea, then please feel free to have a look at that. Anyway, that'll be it from me today. Have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are in the world. And as always, bye for now, guys.